the F-35 might just be getting the biggest upgrade in modern fighter jet history. While most people think the future of air combat means building brand new sixth-generation fighters from scratch, Lockheed Martin is taking a completely different approach. Instead of starting over, they are pushing the F-35 to its absolute limits, adding cutting-edge technology that could rival jets that haven't even been built yet. What kind of firepower would the upgraded F-35 carry, and how do they give the United States an edge over other countries in battle? Join us as we dive into Lockheed Martin's plan and whether their evolution over revolution approach can actually work. In military aviation, there is always a debate: push for brand new tech or keep improving what already works. Lockheed Martin isn't sitting around talking about it. They are upgrading the F-35 to pack in features that edge it closer to sixth-generation fighter capabilities. It's a bold move that leans into evolution over reinvention. Interestingly, the company compares the F-35 to a NASCAR race car, not because it's flashy, but because it is being fine-tuned for peak performance. Instead of building something entirely new, they are squeezing every bit of potential out of a proven platform. The big question now is whether this strategy can hold up against next-gen competition, like Boeing's upcoming F-47. Boeing's F-47 is shaping up to be the Air Force's next big step in fighter jet development. It's part of the next-generation air dominance program, which has been focused on finding a replacement for the F-22 Raptor. This new aircraft is being built with air superiority in mind and could end up being the first sixth-generation fighter in the United States military. The Air Force is planning to acquire at least 185 units of the aircraft, with the final count subject to adjustments depending on funding and operational needs. Design targets include a combat radius of over 1,000 nautical miles, allowing for long-range strike missions and sustained patrol coverage. Projected top speed is set to exceed Mach 2, continuing the tradition of high-velocity performance seen in previous United States air superiority platforms. Despite this plan, the F-35's development kicked off in the mid-1990s under the Joint Strike Fighter program, which set out to build one aircraft that could handle missions across different branches of the military. The first prototype, called the X-35, flew for the first time in October 2000, showing that the concept had real potential. After that, it took another 5 years of engineering and testing before the first full production model, the F-35A, was ready to fly. That flight marked a major step forward, proving the program's goals could be met with a fully functional aircraft. From the start, the team behind the F-35 set out to build a flexible fighter jet that could take over for most of the United States military's existing aircraft, with different versions designed for each branch. Unlike the F-22 Raptor, which was built for a more specific role, the F-35 Lightning II got its name as a nod to the Lockheed P-38 Lightning from World War II, a way to link today's technology with a legacy of past innovation. The project also brought in a wide range of international partners, aiming to make the jet the most widely used fighter across global military forces. Lockheed Martin's plans for the F-35 have delivered strong results, with key milestones showing how widely the aircraft has been adopted. In early 2024, the company marked a major moment by finishing the 10,000th F-35 airframe. That figure highlights how much demand the jet has generated across military forces around the world. Fifth-generation fighters stand apart from earlier models not just because of their stealth-focused design, but because of the advanced computer systems running inside. The F-35 in particular is often described by engineers as a flying computer, thanks to the level of onboard processing power that drives its performance. If anyone asks around at Lockheed Martin about the toughest part of building the F-35, mission systems tend to come up first. That makes sense, considering the Block 3F software needed over 8 million lines of code just to run. The scale of that complexity becomes even clearer when looking at the upcoming Block 4 update, which pushes things even further in terms of computing power and system capability. The Block 4 upgrade is being rolled out in stages from the late 20s through the mid-30s to keep systems running smoothly and maintain full operational performance. The update adds a range of improvements to the F-35, including new weapons built for the platform, specialized armaments for international users, upgraded sensors for improved situational awareness, and the AN/APG-85 radar system with better detection and tracking capabilities. The upgrade also adds stronger electronic support systems to help the aircraft spot and respond to threats more effectively. Video data sharing has been improved to support better coordination with other units. One of the biggest changes is the shift to agile software development, which speeds up how updates and improvements are delivered compared to older methods. A major part of the Block 4 upgrade is Technology Refresh 3, or TR3. It brings faster processors and more memory to the F-35, making it better equipped to handle complex missions and advanced computing tasks. This update keeps the aircraft responsive and reliable under demanding conditions and sets the stage for future upgrades as mission needs and threats continue to evolve. Lockheed Martin is working on upgrades to the existing Pratt & Whitney F-135 engines used in the F-35 fleet, while also looking into adaptive engine technologies. These new systems are designed to change performance settings on the fly, depending on mission needs and operating conditions. The Adaptive Engine Transition Program, or AETP, was launched in 2016 to push development of next-generation propulsion systems. In 2018, Pratt & Whitney received contracts to build two experimental engines, the XA-101 and XA-100, each rated at 45,000 pounds of thrust. By 2021, the program had made solid progress toward changing how fighter aircraft engines are built and perform. The Adaptive Engine Initiative was restructured and rebranded as the Adaptive Engine Development Program, expanding its scope to cover a wider array of military aircraft instead of concentrating on just one. In 2022, the Air Force launched the F-35 Adaptive Engine Replacement Program to begin readying both the aircraft and its infrastructure for future integration of these advanced propulsion systems once they reach operational maturity. In 2023, military leadership chose to focus on upgrading the current F-135 engine through a program called the Engine Core Upgrade, or ECU, instead of moving forward with brand new engine designs right away. The Engine Core Upgrade brings notable gains in key performance areas, boosting thrust and fuel efficiency by 5% and improving cooling capacity by 50%. These changes are essential for meeting the demands of the Block 4 feature set. The upgraded cooling system is critical due to the increased heat produced by the advanced systems in Block 4. Without proper thermal management, extended missions could see reduced performance and reliability. The ECU method delivers immediate improvements while keeping the existing engine platform intact, sidestepping the risks tied to adopting entirely new propulsion technology. The Air Force has held off on swapping out the F-35's engines for the experimental XA-100 models from the adaptive engine programs. That doesn't rule out the possibility of upgrades later on, possibly in the 30s or 40s, once the technology is fully developed. For now, these adaptive engines are expected to first appear in the next-generation Air Dominance Fighters, or NGAD. Designing those aircraft around the engines from the start makes it easier to fully integrate the new propulsion systems, rather than trying to retrofit them into platforms built for older technology. Before any new engines show up, the F-35 is expected to start working alongside a range of unmanned aerial vehicles that expand its role across different mission types. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works is behind Project Carrera, which includes the Speed Racer drone. Each unit runs about $1 million and is built for advanced electronic warfare and reconnaissance. These drones are meant to operate in sync with manned fighters like the F-35, allowing one pilot to manage several platforms at once while still relying on human decision-making in high-stakes combat scenarios. Aerial combat is shifting toward integrated teams where F-35 jets operate with advanced unmanned systems to boost overall mission effectiveness. A key part of this setup is the Common Multi-Mission Truck, or CMMT. It's a low-cost cruise missile option priced around $150,000 per unit, with a range of more than 500 miles. This opens up new tactical options for mission planning and execution. Unmanned systems are changing the way aerial missions are carried out. A single F-35 will be able to control and coordinate up to 8 drones at once through AI-driven systems that handle real-time calculations and decisions. This marks a shift in strategy from solo aircraft missions to networked operations that combine human input with automated precision. The Kratos XQ-58 Valkyrie is one of the more advanced drones being developed to operate alongside modern fighter jets. With a unit cost of about $4 million, it is built to support F-22 and F-35 aircraft during complex missions that involve coordination between manned and unmanned systems. Its design includes stealth-focused features like a sharp-edge frame, a V-shaped tail, and hidden air intakes that help lower its radar visibility and improve performance in hostile environments. The aircraft is capable of flying solo or as part of a coordinated drone group. Its deployment options are adaptable, with the ability to launch from trucks, containers, or naval ships based on mission needs. At the same time, upgrades are being developed for F-35 jets to improve electronic warfare systems aimed at strengthening coordination with unmanned platforms during advanced operations. These advancements are part of the Pentagon's broader plan under the Penetrating Affordable Autonomous Collaborative Killer Program, or PAK. The goal is to develop cost-effective systems that deliver strong performance in combat scenarios. Although the Valkyrie measures only about 30 feet in length, it can carry up to 1,200 pounds of weapons, making it a valuable asset in combined operations involving both crewed and uncrewed aircraft. The payload capacity of the aircraft supports a range of munitions based on mission needs, including precision-guided missiles for targeted strikes and area-effect weapons for broader tactical use. This adaptability allows commanders to adjust drone configurations as battlefield conditions change without needing separate aircraft types for each scenario. A major step forward in drone integration with F-35 jets and future next-generation air dominance fighters is the development of collaborative combat aircraft, or CCA. These unmanned systems are being built to operate alongside crewed platforms like the F-22 and F-35, handling a range of missions such as air-to-air engagements, electronic jamming, intelligence collection, and precision strikes on ground and naval targets with high levels of coordination. Collaborative combat aircraft are a leap beyond earlier loyal wingman drone designs, which relied heavily on human control. These new systems are equipped with advanced AI, allowing for full autonomy, quick adaptation to mission changes, and lower costs compared to conventional military jets. The United States Air Force is aiming to field around 1,000 of these drones, 600 paired with 300 F-35s and 400 supporting 200 NGAD fighters. That number could grow to more than 2,000, depending on how many drones each aircraft can handle during missions. Lockheed Martin is changing the trajectory of the F-35 Lightning with plans to bring in sixth-generation technology from the next-generation air dominance program. CEO Jim Taiclet confirmed that the upgrades will push the jet's capabilities beyond its current level, aiming for what he calls fifth-generation plus. The overhaul includes integrating cybernetics across the aircraft's systems and looking into a fully unmanned version that could fly without a pilot on board. One of the most talked about moments from the CEO's announcement was a challenge issued to Lockheed Martin's engineering teams. The target: deliver 80% of sixth-generation capability at half the cost. That statement has stirred debate across the defense sector and among aviation analysts, signaling a major change in how future combat aircraft might be developed and funded. The idea centers on turning the F-35 into what some in the industry are referring to as an NGAD Light, a version that offers many of the advanced features expected from sixth-generation fighters, but at a lower cost. That approach could make it viable for more military buyers. Lockheed Martin has emphasized that it isn't trying to go head-to-head with Boeing for the official NGAD contract. Instead, the focus remains on upgrading the F-35, which continues to be a key part of the company's defense lineup and a major source of revenue. Lockheed Martin's strategy makes use of its current experience and manufacturing setup, sidestepping the expense and uncertainty tied to building a brand new aircraft. This method of upgrading the jet has led to comparisons within defense circles to high-performance cars, with some referring to it as the NASCAR or Ferrari version. The label highlights how the existing airframe is being enhanced with advanced tech drawn from both the F-35 and NGAD programs. The upgraded jet is expected to benefit from the same advanced systems being built for sixth-generation fighters. That includes hypersonic weapons capable of striking at extremely high speeds, laser-based defenses designed to counter incoming threats, and sensor suites that offer a high level of situational awareness during operations. The new technology being added to the jet brings up a key question. If it can match the capabilities of sixth-generation jets like the NGAD, is there still a need to build those next-gen platforms from scratch? This could change military planning, not just in the United States, but also among allied countries already flying the F-35. Upgrading current fleets might be a more practical option than investing in entirely new aircraft, especially when cost and export limitations are factored in. The F-35 packs some seriously advanced mission systems that make this fighter jet stand out from everything else in the sky. The whole setup revolves around getting all the different sensors and avionics to work together, creating what's basically a super enhanced view of everything happening around the aircraft. At the heart of it all sits the Northrop Grumman AN/APG-81 radar, an active electronically scanned array system that does way more than just detect targets. This actually doubles as part of the electronic warfare suite, which is pretty clever engineering when thinking about it. The electronic warfare game gets handled by the BAE Systems AN/ASQ-239 Barracuda system, designed to mess with enemy radar and communications. Then there's the really cool Northrop Grumman/Raytheon AN/AQ-37 system. They call it the Distributed Aperture System, or DAS. This creates a 360-degree view around the aircraft using multiple sensors. For targeting, Lockheed Martin built the AN/AAQ-40 Electro-Optical Targeting System, or EOTS for short. Communication and navigation get covered by the Northrop Grumman AN/ASQ-242 CNI suite. That's communications, navigation, and identification all rolled into one package. What makes all this technology really special isn't just the individual pieces, but how everything connects together. Instead of having separate systems doing their own thing, the F-35 fuses all this sensor data into one complete picture of what's happening in the local area. The pilot gets this enhanced situational awareness that previous generation fighters just can't match, and the whole aircraft becomes part of a larger networked combat system. Most of the F-35's software got built using C and C++ programming languages, though the developers also grabbed some ATA-83 code from the F-22 program. The Block 3F software package ended up with 8.6 million lines of code, which gives a sense of just how massive this system really is. The whole jet runs on Green Hills software, Integrity DO-178B. That's a real-time operating system designed specifically for critical applications. This RTOS handles the integrated core processors, while data gets moved around using IEEE 1394B and fiber channel connections. The avionics design took a smart approach by using commercial off-the-shelf components wherever possible. This COTS strategy makes upgrades way cheaper and gives more flexibility down the road. The software-defined radio systems are a perfect example. Fleet-wide software updates become much easier to roll out when the hardware foundation uses standard components. But here's the thing that really caused headaches during development: the mission system software, especially the sensor fusion parts. Getting all those different sensors to talk to each other and create one unified picture turned out to be incredibly complex. This software challenge became one of the biggest technical hurdles in the entire program and ended up causing major delays that pushed back delivery schedules for years. If Lockheed Martin released a significantly upgraded F-35 to the market, it's expected that many countries would move quickly to secure orders. The cost-to-capability ratio would make it a strong alternative to developing homegrown platforms or waiting for export versions of sixth-generation fighters. Even if Boeing and its collaborators roll out an exportable NGAD, questions remain about whether the pricing would allow for widespread adoption among allied air forces. Lockheed Martin's plan hinges on whether its engineers can turn the CEO's claim of building a sixth-generation F-35 at half the usual cost into a working product. There's still debate over whether that goal is realistic or just corporate optimism that doesn't match the challenges of developing high-end military aircraft. The defense sector will be paying close attention to see if this concept moves from idea to execution and whether it changes the way air forces think about modernization going forward. No longer content with ruling from the shadows, Mexico's cartels have taken a terrifying step forward. Deep in the mountains, a new kind of soldier is rising. Cartel-trained commandos armed like armies and sworn to crush the state itself. Armored convoys roll through the night, their insignias unseen, their orders deadly clear. Destroy the government. But who created them? And how did Mexico's criminal underworld build its own special forces? Join us as we uncover the secret war the cartels just launched to destroy the government and don't want the world to see. Mexico has reached a decisive turning point. The government has deployed an elite military strike force with one mission: to eliminate every cartel operating within its borders. It is, in every sense, a declaration of war, a sweeping campaign against some of the world's most powerful and violent criminal empires. Almost immediately, security analysts and former U.S. Special Forces veterans warned that such an operation could unleash consequences far worse than the problem it seeks to solve. For decades, Mexico's cartels have generated billions through drug trafficking, human smuggling, and arms sales. Those profits have allowed them to take deep root in the nation's political, economic, and social systems. They aren't isolated in jungles or deserts. They are embedded in communities, influencing local business, policing, and politics. This makes any simple military solution almost impossible. A vivid example of this reality came in 2019 during the Battle of Culiacan. On October 17th, Mexican Special Forces raided a safe house in the Tres Rios district to capture Ovidio Guzman, son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The elite GAF unit secured Ovidio within minutes, a flawless success on paper. But within half an hour, chaos erupted. Encrypted messages triggered a rapid response. More than 700 armed sicarios flooded the streets with 50 caliber machine guns, rocket launchers, and armored trucks. Burning buses blocked roads, gunfire rained from rooftops, and smoke covered the city. Civilians fled as neighborhoods turned into battlefields. By late afternoon, government forces were surrounded. Intelligence later confirmed over 150 cartel vehicles had mobilized, a coordinated military-style counterattack facing civilian deaths and hostage crises. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made the controversial call to release a video. The decision sparked outrage. Videos of burning streets spread across social media, and U.S. officials condemned it as a surrender. DEA data later linked the Sinaloa cartel to nearly 98% of the fentanyl entering the U.S. The release exposed the fragility of Mexico's security system and emboldened the cartels further. Cutting off a cartel's leader or income rarely destroys it. It splinters, creating smaller, more violent factions. Mexico's new campaign risks repeating that cycle, producing even more brutal groups than those it seeks to destroy. And history shows what happens next. When Mexico first declared war on the cartels in 2006, the response was swift and merciless. Assassinations, massacres, and years of bloodshed that claimed tens of thousands of lives. The lesson is clear: these organizations never surrender quietly. Officials have compared the new strategy to Plan Colombia, the U.S.-backed effort that dismantled the FARC insurgency. But the comparison fails. Colombia faces a single unified movement. Mexico faces more than 10 rival cartels, each with its own army, economy, and political ties. This isn't one war, it's many, overlapping and uncontrolled, more like a fractured mafia conflict than a traditional counterinsurgency. U.S. military analysts warn that Mexico's fight cannot resemble Iraq or Fallujah. This is not an enemy state. It's a neighbor and ally where every civilian death carries enormous political and moral cost. Yet despite the warnings, leaders on both sides hail the crackdown as a historic breakthrough. The truth may be far darker. It could become one of the bloodiest counterinsurgencies of the modern era, waged just beyond or even within America's borders. If Mexico's war is the powder keg, America's response could be the spark. As Mexican troops move through cartel strongholds, the United States has been waging its own shadow campaign, including mass deportations, fortified borders, and covert intelligence operations that blur the line between counterterrorism and counter-narcotics. This isn't about saving Mexico. It's about protecting American soil from fentanyl, heroin, meth, and human trafficking. Overdose deaths now claim hundreds of thousands of young Americans each year, silent casualties in a war few leaders openly name. That's why some in Washington want to label the cartels as terrorist organizations. Former President Donald Trump made that threat explicit, warning that any attack on U.S. personnel would trigger full military retaliation. "You hurt a border agent, you hurt a soldier," his border chief Tom Homan said. The wrath of President Trump's going to come down. It wasn't bluster, it was a promise that America was ready to treat cartels like foreign terror groups. But that poses a dangerous paradox. Once America declares open war, it becomes part of a conflict that a single strike cannot end. History shows how cartels respond, with blood in the streets. A 2020 intelligence review revealed that cartels like Sinaloa and CJNG now possess arsenals rivaling small armies, grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, and combat drones. Over the years, one analyst noted, they've built an arsenal that rivals small armies. These aren't street gangs. They are disciplined, well-funded forces operating just hours from U.S. cities. That reality has pushed U.S. agencies, DEA, FBI, ICE, and CIA, into deeper, riskier infiltration efforts across both countries. Lacking clear intelligence, U.S. authorities have turned to a blunt tool: mass deportation. ICE records show tens of thousands of suspected cartel affiliates have been rounded up and sent back to Mexico. The goal is simple: send the problem back. But the result is anything but simple. Deporting hardened criminals doesn't weaken the cartels, it feeds them. Even Tom Homan admitted that many deportees go straight back into cartel networks. In other words, the U.S. is removing violent offenders only for cartels to recruit them again. It's a cycle with no end. Washington presents it as a victory against organized crime, but in truth, it reinforces the same organizations it aims to destroy. Meanwhile, the southern border has become a militarized wall: steel barriers, razor wire, soldiers, and drones stretching across the frontier. Officially, the purpose is to stop illegal crossings. In reality, it's about cutting off cartel trade routes. For now, analysts say the plan is working. But starving the cartels of billions won't make them quit. It could drive them to retaliate. Experts warn that Mexico's chaos could soon cross into U.S. cities: San Antonio, Phoenix, San Diego. They fear the same car bombings and assassinations that scarred Mexico could reach American streets. Cartels already operate inside the U.S. through money laundering fronts and hidden distribution networks. If that pipeline is cut, those networks have both the motive and capacity to strike back. What politicians rarely admit is simple: America's war on the cartels has never been clean, contained, or new. For decades, the U.S. has shaped outcomes abroad, sometimes with success, often with heavy unintended consequences. Plan Colombia is proof. Washington poured more than $15 billion into a 20-year campaign to crush South America's cocaine trade. The FARC eventually laid down arms and entered politics. But the cocaine business didn't disappear. It adapted, shifting routes and methods to survive. That lesson wasn't lost on organized crime elsewhere. Mexico's cartels learned to evolve under pressure, adjusting faster than the forces sent to destroy them. The harder truth is uncomfortable. Sustained U.S. demand for drugs remains the single largest funding source for these organizations. As long as Americans keep buying, profits will keep flowing south. You can capture leaders, raid compounds, and fortify borders, but the vacancies left behind are quickly filled by new, often more ruthless successors. Put together, the current approach forms a self-reinforcing cycle. Militarize the border, choke revenue, deport offenders, and still feed the market that sustains the trade. That pattern is not a strategy for resolution. It is a formula for endless violence. So let's rip off the bandage and examine the few tools that could actually break the cartel's hold, and why most politicians lack the will to use them. Cartels are businesses first and armies second. Like any business, they survive on steady cash flow. Cutting off that money cripples their power, a tactic proven against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS through frozen accounts, disrupted transfers, and intercepted smuggling routes. In the United States, cartel funds flow through legitimate facades, real estate, car dealerships, shipping firms, and even regulated cannabis ventures, all laundering billions under respectable names. That's why many financial investigators insist the most potent weapon isn't a rifle, but a forensic audit that traces money through shell companies, crypto wallets, and offshore accounts. The obstacle is clear. Cartels are masters of concealment, using layers of corporations, cryptocurrencies, and foreign banks. Exposing those channels would require financial transparency that America rarely imposes on its wealthiest citizens. Worsening the problem is a thin U.S. intelligence picture inside Mexico. Every raid or strike risks being launched on incomplete data, and a missed target can mean civilian deaths and propaganda victories for traffickers. This reality has driven U.S. officials to push for extraditions, a tactic that removes kingpins from local reach and ends their influence behind prison walls. The capture and transfer of El Chapo Guzman proved its value, ending years of escapes and manipulation. However, extradition also stirs nationalist resentment in Mexico, which many see as a blow to sovereignty and a public humiliation. At the far edge of policy debate lies the unthinkable: full-scale U.S. military escalation against Mexican cartels, drone strikes, marine deployments, and open warfare against groups designated as terrorists. In classified Pentagon simulations, this scenario has already been mapped out. Airstrikes on drug labs, naval blockades to choke supply routes, and special operations raids on cartel strongholds. On paper, it could work. The United States has the firepower to dismantle cartel networks within weeks. According to Global Firepower, the U.S. military fields about 1.3 million active-duty personnel and nearly 800,000 reservists, with over 4 million draft-eligible citizens, if ever needed. Its scale dwarfs any criminal organization on Earth. Yet Mexico's cartels are far from insignificant. Collectively, they employ roughly 175,000 people, making them, in effect, the nation's fifth-largest employer. Across Latin America's 1.7 million prisoners, they recruit relentlessly, refilling their ranks from inside the prison system. The process is slow but steady, ensuring resilience under pressure. But military strength alone does not guarantee victory. The cartel's greatest weapon isn't manpower or machinery, it's fear. In 2012, 80% of Mexicans supported military action against the cartels. By 2023, that confidence had collapsed. Surveys by Border Report found that in cartel-dominated cities like Juarez and Mexicali, 70% of adults felt unsafe in their own homes. In Reynosa, fear reached 83%, and in Zacatecas, where bodies hang from bridges and fill abandoned vehicles, 92% of residents said they lived in fear. That fear sustains cartel power. Communities often know where criminals operate but stay silent. The threat of abduction or death keeps civilians obedient and shields cartel activity from exposure. For that reason, the U.S. cannot simply storm Mexican cities. Cartel fighters blend seamlessly into civilian populations, turning urban warfare into a humanitarian nightmare. Any intervention must therefore be surgical, guided by precision intelligence and careful movement through densely populated zones. Although Mexico technically allows civilian gun ownership, all legal sales occur through a single military-run gun store in Mexico City. This means cartels arm themselves almost entirely through smuggling. By 2009, authorities had seized more than 4,400 modified rifles, many converted to automatic fire. Tens of thousands more remained in circulation, mostly AR-15 and AK-47s, traced back to the United States. More troubling is the flow of heavier weapons. Evidence shows guided anti-armor systems like javelins, stingers, and AT-4s entering cartel hands through illicit transfers and black market diversions. These weapons raise the stakes of any direct engagement, turning raids into potential urban battlefields. Even so, America's military advantage remains overwhelming. Thousands of tanks, artillery units, and armored vehicles, supported by advanced infantry weapons and missile systems, ensure dominance in open combat, but raw firepower alone cannot solve a conflict fought among civilians. Every strike risks collateral damage. Every operation demands restraint. A U.S. campaign would likely begin with containment, not assault. Forces would encircle target cities, establish checkpoints, and issue public warnings through local media. Civilians would be told to shelter indoors as schools and businesses shut down. Only after intelligence verification and evacuation would armored convoys advance, block by block, isolating cartel zones and dismantling strongholds with minimal civilian harm. Intelligence drives every step. Drones, satellites, and local informants pinpoint high-value targets, guiding troops through narrow streets where cartel gunmen fight from rooftops and alleys. Clashes are fast and violent, AR-15s and AK-47s against M4s and armored support. Backed by coordination and training, U.S. units typically force retreats within hours. But even under pressure, the cartels are experts at escape. Decades of conflict have taught them to vanish. Smuggling tunnels once used for drugs now double as evacuation routes. In 2022, a 1,700-foot tunnel running from Tijuana to a warehouse in San Diego was discovered, 61 feet underground, and fitted with a rail system. El Chapo's famous prison escape used the same method. Countless similar tunnels likely crisscross Mexico, providing quick escape routes in hidden logistics. To counter this, joint U.S.-Mexican forces rely on combined intelligence, sealing exits, deploying sensors, and launching rapid follow-up raids. Even partial successes matter. Each operation scatters personnel, seizes weapons, and fractures the chain of command. The lesson is clear. Dismantling the cartels does not require total war. Cutting off resources, restricting mobility, and breaking communications can cripple them without citywide destruction. At sea, the cartel's empire stretches far beyond Mexico's shores, as Rear Admiral Christopher Tomey of the U.S. Coast Guard revealed in 2015, over 95% of drugs entering the United States travel by water. They use cargo ships, yachts, fishing boats, and even handmade fiberglass and wooden submarines. Stealthy but fragile. Here, U.S. dominance is absolute. The Navy's 440 warships, including 11 aircraft carriers, 9 helicopter carriers, and 81 destroyers, ensure unmatched power. Projection cartels possess no weapon capable of threatening them. Supporting the fleet are 70 submarines and dozens of corvettes capable of erasing cartel submersibles with a single strike. The real challenge is not combat, but detection. Smugglers often hide contraband aboard legitimate cargo vessels, making identification difficult. The U.S. Navy responds with layered blockades, one in the Gulf of Mexico, another in the Pacific, and a third near the Yucatan Channel. These maritime operations synchronize with ground offensives, closing every known route. In the air, cartels rely solely on logistics. Between 2006 and 2015, authorities seized nearly 600 planes and helicopters linked to the Sinaloa cartel. Thousands of clandestine airstrips, many hidden deep in forests or deserts, support these flights. Their aircraft, mostly Cessnas and Gulfstreams, move drugs and cash but cannot fight. The United States, however, commands around 13,000 aircraft, including 1,800 fighters, 900 attack jets, and thousands of transport planes and helicopters. This ensures total air superiority. Yet Washington exercises restraint, focusing on neutralizing airstrips and isolating smuggling routes rather than bombing populated zones. Recent surveillance operations have intensified these efforts. Once a hidden landing strip or trafficking route is confirmed, it is swiftly destroyed, cutting off critical corridors the cartels rely on, combined with tighter airport inspections and scrutiny of private aircraft. This campaign has effectively grounded much of the cartel air fleet. Smugglers now depend on a handful of helicopters, none capable of matching U.S. reach or sophistication. The balance of power now tilts decisively toward the United States. Even while limiting its full capabilities to protect civilians, America has struck cartel strongholds, imposed a naval blockade, and secured near total control of Mexican airspace. Yet the cartel's resilience comes from something deeper than weapons and money. Estimates of cartel revenue vary. In 2019, Senator David Perdue described the drug trade as a multi-billion-dollar empire, possibly worth $500 billion. Larger than Walmart. Other reports place annual earnings between $6 and $29 billion. Homeland Security estimated that in 2021 alone, cartels made about $13 billion from human trafficking and smuggling. While far below the U.S. defense budget, these sums are enough to buy loyalty, fund weapons, and sustain operations. This financial power explains America's naval blockade. With 95% of cartel drugs shipped by sea, Closing ports chokes their main revenue stream, the remaining cash reserves become finite, limiting their ability to bribe, rearm, or expand. Simultaneously, U.S. intelligence targets drug labs and production hubs, dismantling the infrastructure that fuels their economy. Disrupting outside supply chains also weakens them. Around 90% of cocaine entering the U.S. originates in Colombia before crossing Mexican territory. By tightening naval patrols in the South Pacific and checkpoints in Central America, Washington aims to starve the cartels of revenue and force internal fractures. And those fractures may prove decisive. Mexico's criminal underworld is not united. It's divided into at least 10 major groups, including Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, the Gulf Cartel, and Juarez. Constant infighting over territory and leadership prevents any unified resistance. As U.S. pressure mounts, that fragmentation becomes fatal. Disconnected factions struggle to coordinate, and rival bosses turn on each other in chaos. Eventually, internal disorganization and external force combine to destroy what fear and money once held together. Across the Arizona desert, over 300 cartel members met their end, but not at the hands of the government. What began as the Polish Hall Massacre has evolved into a silent war, one waged in the shadows and buried in secrecy. The Hells Angels have returned, striking with precision and leaving no trace behind. Yet one question lingers. How did they plan it so flawlessly? And why does the government remain so eerily silent? Join us as we reveal how the Hells Angels attacked the cartel boss's headquarters on the Arizona border. The Arizona desert has always been a place without rules. For decades, it was simply a deserted crossing ground. Then came the fearless Hells Angels. However, they weren't the only fearless group in that region. From the south came another kind of force, the Sinaloa cartel, armed to the teeth and trained like soldiers. And just as expected, both worlds collided. It was inevitable. When the dust cleared, 300 cartel members were dead. But what instigated the clash? To understand that, let's rewind to 1974. Cleveland, a small Polish neighborhood, hosted a motorcycle show inside a hall meant for local families. But that night, the event turned into a bloody nightmare. It was the deadliest biker clash in the history of the United States, and the aftermath was dubbed the Polish Hall Massacre. For the Hells Angels, that day was tragic, but that tragedy birthed something deeper, a bond sealed in blood. Decades later, that same loyalty burned bright again in Arizona, and it was obvious that the fight wasn't just about territory. The Angels moved like a unit, using old war tactics and new weapons. The cartel was powerful, but they weren't prepared for men who had spent a lifetime mastering chaos. However, by the time 2023 rolled in, the Sinaloa cartel had turned the western Arizona corridor into its private highway. From Lukeville to San Luis Rio, Colorado, trucks and gunmen flowed through what locals called the Sonoran Gate. Border Patrol agents saw the change. Crossings became tactical, with convoys using satellite maps, night vision scouts, and diversion trails. What had once been smuggling now looked like a coordinated military movement. Around the same time, ranchers near Ajo started spotting motorcycle groups riding at night, scanning fence lines and patrolling dirt roads. Police thought they were vigilantes, but intercepted radio chatter said otherwise. The voices used codes linked to the Hells Angels California nomads, and they had their reasons. The cartel's fentanyl had taken too many of their brothers. To them, it was retribution. The code forever forward had turned into something sharper, heavier. By late 2023, reports from the Pima County Sheriff's Office showed strange activity along State Road 85, burned out vehicles, NATO shell casings, and tire marks. Leading north witnesses mentioned Harley riders escorting civilian trucks in tight formation through the desert. Nobody could explain it, and nobody wanted to believe what it really was. Then it all went down on March 17, 2024. A convoy of 12 trucks crossed through an unmarked path outside Organ Pipe National Monument. They belonged to Los Ninis, the Sinaloa cartel's enforcers, heavily armed with M249s, RPGs, and drones sweeping the dark. They were heading toward a storage hideout near Kasab with the mission to move narcotics meant for United States distribution. But the northern route was already under control by none other than the Hells Angels. They expected to face border patrols. What they met instead were engines rumbling low, headlamps blacked out, and men in leather vests waiting in silence. When the first shot cracked through the desert air, the Angels' old code came alive again. Federal officials later revealed it was the first full-blown tactical fight ever recorded between an American biker gang and a Mexican cartel. But this wasn't a random encounter. Days before the clash, the Angels had slipped into the area, setting up hidden weapon stashes near ridges and dry washes. Old-school tactics that they perfected during the violent biker wars of the 1970s were suddenly back in play. At the center of it all was Rex Mendez, a Marine Corps veteran with battlefield discipline and a deep grudge against cartels. Expelled from the club years ago, he was called back for one reason, which was to lead this desert strike. His men moved in silence, using encrypted shortwave radios and military-style coordination. At exactly 14 minutes past 1 in the morning, the convoy entered the kill zone. In seconds, the desert exploded with gunfire. Thermal cameras picked up flashes so bright that orbiting satellites mistook them for lightning strikes. What followed was 43 minutes of chaos, a deadly firefight stretching across nearly 3 miles of open sand. A border ranger stationed miles away said it sounded like Fallujah all over again. Around 40 Hells Angels faced more than 200 cartel soldiers. The bikers used dune paths to circle the convoy, hitting from both flanks with assault rifles and homemade explosives. Audio recovered later confirmed they were using NATO-style hand signals and coordinated bursts. Military precision inside a criminal showdown. When the sun rose, drones revealed the grim aftermath. Trucks burning, smoke drifting into the sky, and bodies scattered across the dunes. The Angels had vanished, leaving only wreckage behind. Investigators later counted over 300 dead, most from the Sinaloa-linked Los Ninis group. Among them was Victor Elpez Quinterero, a cartel lieutenant who managed fentanyl routes through Arizona. His death sent shockwaves across Mexico, sparking revenge killings and blame within the cartel's own ranks. By the time the FBI arrived, the message was clear. A war had just been declared in the desert. In southern Arizona, strange signs also began to surface. Farmers near Alter noticed tire tracks carved into the dry riverbeds. In Lukeville, locals spoke of the quiet night being interrupted by motorcycle engines. The federal agencies reportedly knew the Hells Angels were creeping closer to the border. Still, they stood aside because some officials believed the bikers could serve as an unofficial counterforce to cartel activity. That night would later be remembered as the Sonoran Purge. From the Mexican side, it looked like another smuggling run, a string of trucks snaking north through the desert. But the calm hid something heavier. Locals said the air felt charged, as if the sand itself was waiting. Just before 1 a.m., U.S. border sensors near the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument detected unusual heat patterns and unidentified vehicles moving fast and low. Cameras caught dim lights crawling north through the desert dust. But it wasn't just one convoy. Another smaller group was running parallel to the first, moving just to their west. Those were the Hells Angels. Satellite records later showed that both groups entered the same desert grid within 4 minutes. Federal operators watching live feeds mistook the bikers for a border patrol unit. Then the first flares burst over the sand. Gunfire followed. Confused radio chatter filled the air. Multiple heat contacts. Looks like law enforcement engaging smugglers. Gunfire tore through the Sonoran night just after 1 a.m. According to reports pieced together by Mexican state police, the Sinaloa convoy never stood a chance. They were hit from two sides, north and west, by an enemy that moved like soldiers, not street gangs. The attackers used suppressive fire and buried explosives hidden under marked stones. Every move was deliberate, every shot planned. Witnesses said the ambush began at exactly 14 minutes after 1 a.m. Tracer rounds sliced the darkness like flashes of lightning. The first truck to blow was a fuel hauler, obliterated by an improvised mortar built from a modified M203 launcher. The convoy fell into confusion as flames lit up the dunes. One cartel survivor later told El Universal that he saw motorcycles cresting the sand ridges, riders dressed in black tactical gear, faces masked, their rifles wrapped with red bandanas. They said nothing, only the mechanical rhythm of their assault. The Angels moved in pairs, covering one another with trained precision, advancing through smoke and fire as if on a battlefield. The cartel's rear vehicles tried to flee south, but that's when Rex Mendez, the ex-Marine leading the Hells Angels strike, gave the order that sealed their fate. No survivors. What followed was 5 minutes of ruthless combat. Over 40 vehicles were reduced to burning shells, and within the hour, thermal sensors tracked more than 300 heat signatures, fading to nothing. When U.S. drones finally shifted position to get a clearer view, the bikers were gone, completely. Not a single motorcycle trace showed on infrared scans. Investigators were baffled. How could a whole strike team vanish across open desert without a trace? Later, the mystery unraveled. A hidden web of dry riverbeds connected the battle zone to private ranch lands north of Arizona. Those routes, known only to locals, fed straight into the Tohono O'odham Nation Reservation, an enormous stretch of territory federal agents rarely entered without tribal clearance. That's where the Angels disappeared into the desert's veins, swallowed by silence. By dawn, all that remained was a legend that no one would publicly admit happened. The desert, once again, kept its secret. By sunrise, the Arizona desert looked like the aftermath of a forgotten war. The sand was littered with bodies and scorched weapons, the air heavy with the smell of oil, blood, and gunpowder. The Hells Angels had chosen their battleground perfectly, and they left nothing behind but ruin. At 7:45 a.m., Mexican troops crossed the border to recover their dead. But by then, U.S. forces had already locked down the area. The official story given to the media was simple: an inter-cartel shootout. Yet the evidence on the ground said otherwise. Investigators found U.S.-made NATO shell casings traced back to an Arizona National Guard armory batch stolen in 2020. Whoever planned this attack were trained. Within hours, the internet began to stir. Encrypted biker forums filled with coded chatter and blurred photos of charred pickup trucks. The posts carried a single phrase: 173 Retribution. To longtime members, the message was unmistakable. It was a nod to the Angels' infamous 1974 Polish Hall confrontation. For them, the Sonoran Purge was payback. The Hells Angels had lost too much to stay silent. Brothers dead from fentanyl, families torn apart by addiction, children taken by the cartel's poison. To them, this was more a revenge than a crime. It was the front line of a war that no government had the courage to fight. A leaked Homeland Security report later confirmed what many suspected. The Angels acted on their own. No federal backing, no coordination. But their precision rivaled that of trained military units. The report listed 3 confirmed safe houses in Tucson, Nogales, and Ajo, all under surveillance. None were raided. Washington stayed silent. Behind closed doors, federal agents argued about the next step. Confronting the Angels risked sparking a domestic insurgency. Ignoring them meant letting an outlaw army enforce its own kind of justice. The government chose silence, and across the border, the Sinaloa cartel answered in blood. Within 2 days, gunmen stormed a ranch in Sonora, executing 2 men believed to be American nationals. Soon after, a scrapyard in Phoenix went up in flames. The owner, a rumored Angels affiliate, vanished without a trace. The war had only just begun. Not long after the desert battle, cartel forums lit up with threats. Photos of charred motorcycles appeared online, captioned in Spanish, "For every boss, a death." But the cartel's warning only fueled the Hells Angels' fury. Within 2 weeks, 3 cartel commanders, Elgato, Pajaro, and Moro, were found dead along the Sonoran highways. Each body carried the same mark carved into the chest, a flaming skull with angel wings. It wasn't graffiti. Mexican officials quietly told reporters the killings looked ritualistic, likely the work of a foreign group. But no one was ever named, and the case files disappeared into silence. Still, the signs of the Angels' presence were impossible to hide. Satellite photos showed fresh motorcycle tracks heading north from the battleground. Fuel receipts from Yuma and Gila lined up with those same hours. Witnesses described long convoys of black Harleys gliding through the desert night. The Angels' code, no talk, no surrender, no witnesses, kept them untouchable. Yet bits of proof leaked out. Investigators traced encrypted Bitcoin payments from known members to dark web arms dealers. Le Balancing later revealed the Angels had spent over $2.1 million on weapons-grade munitions from ex-military suppliers in Texas. What started as vengeance was now turning into something bigger, an organized force with military discipline and underground logistics. For the Angels, loyalty was law. The government's silence only strengthened their cause. One former member told Rolling Stone, "The government doesn't defend these borders anymore. We did what real men are supposed to do, protect what's ours." That quote became the heart of the movement's new belief: self-enforced justice. But justice in the Angels' world came wrapped in fire and blood. By late April, over 300 cartel operatives were confirmed dead, not just from the original ambush, but from a wave of revenge killings stretching across northern Mexico. Mexico's government denied any U.S. link to the Sonoran Purge, but classified leaks told a different story. A secret defense report revealed that the attackers' precision mirrored U.S. Special Operations training analysts suspected that former Marines and private contractors had joined the Hells Angels ranks. That theory proved true when investigators traced recovered AR-15 rifles, custom builds with erased serials, back to old Marine surplus shipments diverted years earlier. The discovery forced the FBI to launch Operation Red Rain, a covert investigation into biker militias operating near the southern border. Yet despite hundreds of deaths and piles of evidence, not a single Angel has ever been arrested. Weeks later, satellite footage revealed strange patterns deep in the Arizona wastelands, but the locals said nothing. Journalists who drove into Ajo and Y found locked doors and blank stares. One rancher finally told NBC News, "Nobody talks about that night. You didn't see it. You didn't hear it. You just keep your head down." Officials claim the truth was lost to technical failure. The Intercept was told that all border surveillance footage from March 17th had been corrupted, yet fragments leaked anyway. When federal cleanup teams and local sheriffs arrived, they were given one order: collect what's left, then erase everything else. Evidence was gathered, and bulldozers followed. Dozens of destroyed vehicles were buried in shallow desert trenches under the guise of environmental reclamation. Within hours, the scene was gone. But in the digital age, you can't bury proof forever. Satellite analysts from Bellingcat later revealed nearly 3 miles of burn scars across the northern edge of Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, clear signs of multiple vehicle explosions. Reuters reported over 300 confirmed cartel deaths, while Mexican officials privately admitted the number was closer to 400. In Sonora, families lined up at morgues clutching missing posters. Some bodies were found, many never were. Forensic experts said several remains were burned beyond recognition, possibly by thermite, a military-grade incendiary compound. The theory was never confirmed publicly, but investigators knew what that meant. Whoever carried out the attack had access to serious weaponry. A leaked Customs and Border Protection debrief, later published by ProPublica, described an unknown paramilitary motorcycle unit operating with near-perfect tactical discipline. The attackers used NATO-style suppressive formations, coordinated advances, and precision fire patterns, techniques far beyond street-level gangs. Every point aligned with what witnesses had already described. This was no random ambush. It was a calculated military strike. Meanwhile, chaos consumed the Sinaloa cartel. Commanders vanished, safe houses were torched, and rival factions turned on one another, each accusing the other of betrayal. What began as a border skirmish had now fractured one of Mexico's most powerful criminal empires. The official record still calls it an internal cartel dispute, but the leaked footage, the scorched earth, and the missing men tell another story. After the massacre, the DEA began picking up strange cartel messages. Many members believed the U.S. had unleashed mercenaries against them. One enforcer told El Universal that it felt like being hunted by ghosts. The cartel's media group, Los Chapitos Media, quickly claimed that American agents had guided foreign hitmen, but insiders knew the truth. The cartel struck back fast. Within 2 weeks, they launched revenge attacks across Tucson, Phoenix, and Yuma, targeting anyone thought to be linked to the Angels. Several were killed, some vanished, and a Phoenix scrapyard used for Harley repairs was burned down. But their retaliation only made the story stronger. Inside the U.S., the FBI secretly opened Project Black Smoke, a classified operation meant to hide any evidence of vigilante biker missions along the border. According to a Newsweek leak, the project's goal wasn't justice, it was silence. One retired FBI agent summed it up: "When devils fight devils, we look the other way." And that's exactly what the government did. There was no acknowledgement. Officially, they called it a narcotics dispute, but the Hells Angels knew what had happened, and to them, it was payback. On April 9, 2024, hundreds of bikers gathered at an abandoned airstrip near Tonopah, Nevada. Satellite images showed over 300 motorcycles forming a massive circle. Witnesses spoke of bonfires and a ritual called the burn, where bikers threw patches, photos, and bullet casings into the flames while repeating their creed: "Forever forward." By dawn, a new symbol had been born: a winged skull surrounded by barbed wire with the number 317, honoring the dead cartel leaders. Soon after, murals, online graphics, and secret messages appeared with the slogan, "No talk, no witness." In Phoenix, a huge mural briefly appeared under a highway bridge showing the Angel's skull emblem above the words, "They crossed, we answered." It was quickly painted over, but not before the image went viral. By June 2024, a Department of Justice memo quietly admitted the obvious. Biker gangs were evolving into paramilitary groups along the southern border. The Angels had done what years of government funding and military patrols couldn't. They ended cartel incursions through fear. One U.S. border official told NBC News, "We don't need to like them, we just need them to keep the bad guys out." Across Arizona's desert towns, the gunfire faded and smuggling trails went quiet. But locals said they still heard engines at night. Nobody asks who they are anymore. The cartel's maritime convoy has just suffered its greatest loss, watching a massive drug shipment vanish under U.S. firepower. With crackdowns intensifying, cartel leaders took their boldest gamble yet, deploying narco subs, go-fasts, and armed boats to shield their cargo. But when the fleet crossed paths with a controversial U.S. Navy task force, the outcome was swift and devastating. How did the Navy dismantle the convoy? How severe was the blow to cartel operations? Join us as we reveal the full story behind the strike that crushed the cartel at sea. In what U.S. officials are calling the largest narcotics offload in Coast Guard history, crews in Florida on Saturday unloaded 76,140 pounds of cocaine and marijuana seized during coordinated operations across the Eastern Pacific and Caribbean. Valued at an estimated $473 million, the record-breaking haul underscores the Trump administration's escalating counter-narcotics campaign under its new initiative, Operation Pacific Viper. The massive seizure consisted of 61,740 pounds of cocaine and 14,400 pounds of marijuana, intercepted during 19 separate smuggling operations. Authorities detained 34 cartel members and confirmed the removal of what they estimate as 23 million lethal doses of cocaine, an amount that could, in theory, fatally overdose the entire population of Florida. The interruptions were far from routine. Coast Guard cutters, tactical boarding teams, a helicopter squadron, and even the Navy's USS Cole joined in sweeping maritime operations involving a Royal Netherlands Navy vessel. 11 high-speed, go-fast boats were intercepted, many after grueling multi-day pursuits in open waters. Among the largest seizures were 8,800 pounds of cocaine near the Galapagos Islands in June and 9,160 pounds near Socorro Island, Mexico, in July. Officials celebrated the bust as a milestone in President Trump's wider effort to stem narcotics inflows into the United States. Homeland Security described the mission as a historic partnership, leveraging overwhelming naval and Coast Guard power in international waters, where roughly 80% of successful interdictions occur. By pushing enforcement farther offshore, the administration seeks to dismantle supply routes before they can ever reach American ports. What makes Operation Viper stand out even more is the presence of USS Cole. This Arleigh Burke-class Flight 1 Aegis-guided missile destroyer was home-ported at Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia. The ship was named in honor of Marine Sergeant Darrell S. Cole, a machine gunner taken out in action on Iwo Jima in February 1945 during World War II. Built by Ingalls Shipbuilding and delivered to the Navy on the 11th of March 1996, It remains one of 62 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and one of 21 Flight 1 class ships that carried the original 5-inch 54 caliber gun mounts. After years of continuous service, the destroyer became the center of international attention on the 12th of October 2000, when it was attacked by al-Qaeda terrorists in the Yemeni port of Aden. A small fiberglass boat packed with more than 1,000 pounds of explosives detonated against the ship's port side while it was refueling, tearing a 40 by 60-foot hole into the hull. 17 sailors lost their lives, 39 were wounded, and the blast caused extensive structural damage. The attack was the deadliest strike against a U.S. Navy vessel since the Iraqi missile assault on USS Stark in 1987. It revealed the lethal effectiveness of asymmetric warfare tactics and demonstrated how vulnerable even advanced warships could be in port. The crew fought flooding for 3 days before stabilizing the vessel. Divers later confirmed the keel remained intact, making eventual repairs possible. Following the attack, the wounded were evacuated to the U.S. Army's Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany before being transferred back to the United States. In June 2001, al-Qaeda propaganda openly celebrated the strike, with Osama bin Laden himself praising it as a model for future assaults. Al-Qaeda had already attempted a similar but less publicized strike months before the Cole bombing. On the 3rd of January 2000, operatives tried to attack the U.S. Navy destroyer USS The Sullivans while it was in port at Aden as part of the Millennium attack plots. The plan was to load a small boat with explosives and detonate it alongside the warship. The attempt failed when the overloaded craft sank before reaching its target, forcing the mission to be abandoned. Planning for the later attack on Cole was revived during the al-Qaeda summit in Kuala Lumpur between the 5th and 8th of January 2000. That meeting was attended by several operatives, including Khalid al-Mihdhar, who would later become one of the September 11th hijackers. Mihdhar traveled afterwards to San Diego, California, before leaving on the 10th of June 2000 to visit his wife in Yemen, at a house that also functioned as a communications hub for al-Qaeda. Following the Cole bombing, Yemeni officials identified Mihdhar as one of the planners and confirmed his presence in Yemen at the time of the operation. He later returned to the United States and took part in the hijacking of American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon and took the lives of 184 people. Rescue efforts on Cole began within hours of the explosion. The first naval vessel on scene was HMS Marlborough, a Royal Navy Type 23 frigate commanded by Captain Anthony Ricks. Marlborough diverted from its return voyage to the United Kingdom after a 6-month deployment in the Persian Gulf. With full medical and damage control teams aboard, the frigate immediately assisted Cole's crew. 11 of the most critically wounded sailors were evacuated by the French Air Force to a French military hospital in Djibouti, where they underwent surgery before being transferred to Germany. Additional U.S. military support quickly followed. A quick reaction force from the U.S. Air Force 363rd Expeditionary Security Forces Squadron arrived from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, aboard C-130 aircraft. Soon after, United States Marines from the Interim Marine Corps Security Force Company in Bahrain landed by P-3 Orion, later reinforced by a fleet anti-terrorism security team platoon flown in from Norfolk, Virginia on the 13th of October. Other U.S. Navy ships rushed to the area to provide support. USS Donald Cook and USS Hawes arrived the same day to deliver logistical and repair assistance. In the days that followed, USNS Catawba, USS Camden, USS Anchorage, USS Duluth, and USS Tarawa reached Aden, bringing harbor security, damage control equipment, replacement crews, billeting, and food services for the surviving sailors. USS Cole was hauled across the sea and arrived in Pascagoula, Mississippi on the 13th December 2000, where the long process of rebuilding began. The investigation that followed was carried out under extremely hostile conditions. FBI and NCIS agents deployed to Yemen faced an environment where every movement carried danger. At the airport, they were met by Yemeni special forces, each soldier with an AK-47 pointed in their direction. In the evenings, speakers in Yemen's parliament called for jihad against America, their words broadcast on local television. When the agents requested surveillance footage, Yemeni authorities eventually produced a video, but the crucial moment of the explosion had been deleted. The agents lived under constant threat. They often slept in their clothes with weapons at their sides. At one point, their hotel was surrounded by armed men in traditional dress, some mounted in jeeps, forcing the agents to abandon the building for the safety of a U.S. Navy vessel anchored in the Bay of Aden. Even then, security remained uncertain. When finally cleared to fly back to shore, their helicopter flew evasive maneuvers to avoid the threat of shoulder-launched missiles. By May 2008, all those convicted for their roles in the Cole bombing had either escaped custody or been released by Yemeni officials. On the 30th of June 2008, U.S. military officials announced formal charges against Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, who had been held at Guantanamo Bay since 2008. Accused of organizing and directing the bombing, he faced a military tribunal and the prospect of capital punishment. He was one of 3 high-value detainees acknowledged by the U.S. government as having been subjected to waterboarding and other enhanced interrogation techniques during detention. Abu Ali al-Harathi was also identified as a key figure behind the attack. He became one of the first suspected terrorists to be targeted and killed by a missile-armed Predator drone. In 2003, the U.S. Justice Department indicted Jamal Ahmad Mohammed al-Badawi and Fahd al-Qusso, described as the last major conspirator still at large. Al-Badawi was convicted in Yemen and sentenced to capital punishment, but later escaped from prison in 2006 through a tunnel with 16 other inmates. He was ultimately taken out in a U.S. drone strike in January 2019 in Yemen's Marib Governorate. Fahd al-Qusso evaded capture for years until he was taken out by a U.S. drone strike in May 2012. Tawfiq bin Attash, captured in Pakistan in 2003 and held at Guantanamo Bay, has also been described as a mastermind of the bombing. Another co-conspirator, Abdul Mun'im Salim al-Fatahani, was confirmed killed in a U.S. drone strike in January 2012. Reports from the Yemeni government in May 2012 confirmed that Fahd al-Qusso was eliminated in a southern Yemen airstrike, later verified by both U.S. officials and al-Qaeda's own media wing, As-Sahab. The aftermath of the bombing raised critical questions about the rules of engagement that had governed Cole's security. Pentagon-approved procedures forbade guards from firing on small boats unless ordered by the captain or a senior officer. The suicide craft was not identified as hostile until it was too late, leaving sentries powerless to act. Accounts from surviving sailors described the immediate aftermath. Petty Officer John Washak recalled being ordered to turn his M60 machine gun away from a second approaching boat, even as he stood wounded and covered in blood. The order was a reminder that firing without being fired upon could have led to court-martial. Petty Officer Jennifer Kudrick later reflected that, had the sentries opened fire, they might have faced punishment for taking out 2 foreign nationals rather than recognition for preventing the deaths of 17 American sailors. Years after the attack, responsibility for the USS Cole bombing was formally addressed in U.S. courts. On 14 March 2007, a federal judge ruled that the government of Sudan was liable, citing substantial evidence that Sudanese officials had aided al-Qaeda's operations. In July of that year, the same court ordered Sudan to pay $8 million to the families of the 17 sailors who lost their lives, though Sudan's justice minister declared that the ruling would be appealed. In 2009, U.S. federal judge Kimba Wood released $13.4 million in frozen Sudanese assets to be awarded to 33 spouses, parents, and children of the sailors who lost their lives in the bombing. The compensation was granted under the 2002 Terrorism Risk Insurance Act and pursued through the efforts of Miami attorney Andrew C. Hall. The ruling reaffirmed Sudan's culpability in facilitating the attack. Another lawsuit was filed in 2010 in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia by 15 Cole sailors and 3 spouses, seeking damages for Sudan's role in supporting the terrorists who struck the destroyer. When the Sudanese government failed to respond, the court issued a default judgment in 2012, awarding the plaintiffs more than $314 million. On the 13th of February, 2020, the government of Sudan announced that it had reached an agreement to compensate the families of the USS Cole victims, a prerequisite for its removal from the state sponsors of terrorism list. Sudan reiterated that it did not accept responsibility for the bombing, but sought to normalize relations with the United States and other nations, while addressing claims tied to its former regime. In October 2020, a bilateral claims agreement was signed under which Sudan committed to pay $335 million in compensation, covering the victims of both the USS Cole bombing and the 1998 embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. 2 years after the attack, USS Cole was once again underway, resuming full operations. In August 2003, the destroyer sailed with the Argentine warship Serendipity for joint drills. Cole's visit board search and seizure teams trained alongside their counterparts, conducting intensive maritime interdiction operations. The following day, the ship fired its close-in weapon system and 5-inch rounds in a live-fire exercise before exchanging officers with Serendipity by helicopter. Soon after, the destroyer Gonzales joined, and together the three ships rehearsed coordinated boardings. In February 2008, the destroyer was sent off Lebanon's coast, followed by further deployments. In February 2017, after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels attacked a Saudi warship in the Gulf of Aden, Cole was ordered to the region. Both Iran and the Houthis denied working together, but the symbolism of Cole's presence was unmistakable. In May 2024, Cole deployed once again amid escalating Middle East tensions following the Hamas attack on Israel. Operating from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, the destroyer formed part of a strike force. Then in October 2024, the ship made headlines again. During Iranian missile strikes against Israel, Cole intercepted incoming weapons using SM-3 and SM-6 missiles, decisive proof of her enduring role at the front line of U.S. naval power. Unlucky for the cartels and those backing them, the USS Cole is not the only force now in play. A sudden and heavy buildup of U.S. naval power in the Southern Caribbean has sparked serious questions in Caracas and across Washington about whether this deployment is truly about combating drug cartels, as the Trump administration insists, or if there is another objective beneath the surface. 7 U.S. warships, reinforced by a nuclear-powered fast-attack submarine, are either already in the region or expected to arrive soon. Together, they bring more than 4,500 sailors and Marines, a formidable show of force in waters that usually see far smaller deployments. President Donald Trump has declared that fighting cartels is a central mission for his administration, and U.S. officials claim the operation is designed to dismantle trafficking networks and foreign criminal groups. Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, went further, describing the buildup as a direct strike against drug cartels and foreign terrorist organizations operating in the hemisphere. Yet the true effect of this presence remains uncertain. Most maritime drug routes into the United States run through the Pacific, not the Atlantic, where these ships now patrol. And much of the Caribbean trade enters by clandestine flights, not sea lanes. The scale of the deployment makes clear that this is more than routine patrol duty. Among the vessels are the USS San Antonio, the USS Iwo Jima, the USS New York, and the USS Fort Lauderdale. Each is engineered for combat durability, operational versatility, and long-term offensive power. The USS Iwo Jima, a landing helicopter dock, serves as a floating command center for Marines and aircraft alike. It can launch helicopters, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, and amphibious assault vehicles. Defensive systems, from the rolling airframe missile to the Phalanx close-in weapon system, shield the vessel against incoming missiles, hostile aircraft, and surface threats, ensuring constant readiness in contested waters. The USS San Antonio and USS New York, both amphibious transport docks, are stealth-enhanced platforms built to carry thousands of Marines, vehicles, and equipment directly to shore. Their over-the-horizon amphibious capability relies on landing craft, helicopters, and tiltrotors, enabling sudden strikes beyond visible range. Reinforced hulls and command networks ensure resilience and survival under fire, turning the group into a mobile base of sustained combat power. Alongside them, the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit deploys with unmatched adaptability. With approximately 2,200 Marines, the unit is trained in amphibious assaults, urban warfare, reconnaissance, and specialized missions. It fields armored vehicles, artillery, and air assets, including AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, AV-8B Harrier jets, and MV-22 Ospreys, combining firepower with speed for decisive land and coastal strikes. The strength of this force lies in its integration, Secure, real-time networks link ships, aircraft, and Marines on the ground, enabling fast intelligence sharing, coordinated targeting, and synchronized action. This connectivity allows the group to switch seamlessly between amphibious combat, maritime security, humanitarian response, or precision special operations, projecting deterrent and offensive power across the globe within days. Reinforcing the message, on August 29, 2025, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser was photographed docking at Panama's naval base near the entrance to the Panama Canal. The skies above the Caribbean are now dominated by American surveillance. P-8 Poseidon aircraft, specialized naval patrol planes derived from the Boeing 737 platform, conduct persistent flights over international waters, collecting intelligence with surgical precision. Unlike their civilian counterparts, these aircraft are engineered for combat endurance and maneuverability. Reinforced fuselages, redesigned nacelles, stronger wings, and advanced anti-icing systems allow them to operate at lower altitudes and perform aggressive turns beyond the capacity of standard passenger jets. Each Poseidon carries a powerful suite of sensors, radars, and electronic warfare systems. The Raytheon APY-10 multi-mission radar can detect submarines, ships, and low-flying aircraft across vast distances. Inside the cabin, 5 crew stations line the port side, manned by naval flight officers and enlisted warfare operators who fuse radar, sonar, and electronic intelligence streams into a single operational picture. Unlike older P-3 Orions, the Poseidon sacrifices the magnetic anomaly detector in most versions, relying instead on advanced signal processing and, when necessary, pairing with unmanned MQ-4C Triton drones for continuous coverage. Weapons capability matches its surveillance role. A small bomb bay behind the wing can deploy torpedoes, depth charges, or specialized stores. With a high-altitude anti-submarine warfare weapon capability, even standard torpedoes can be dropped from 30,000 feet, turning them into precision glide weapons. The Poseidon's design also includes 6 auxiliary fuel tanks and the ability to refuel mid-flight via Air Force KC-13-5, KC-10, or KC-46 tankers, extending its range for days-long operations. The significance of their presence is not lost on observers. Officially, Washington maintains the operation is directed at cartel networks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has positioned himself at U.S. Southern Command in Florida, reinforcing the administration's claim of direct oversight. Yet regional analysts remain unconvinced. They argue the deployment reflects classic pressure tactics against Nicolas Maduro's government in Venezuela. For David Smilda, the message is unmistakable: a calculated display of power, the kind of maritime coercion once described simply as gunboat diplomacy. At midnight, FA-18 Super Hornets launch from a carrier and strike a hardened Venezuelan cartel lab hidden in the hills. Precision sensors pick fleeing men, lasers paint targets, and BLU-109 bunker busters collapse the tunnels in seconds. A hideout is erased, a command node shattered, and a blunt message sent across the region. This is modern naval air power, fast, surgical, and utterly unforgiving. On August 15th, the President ordered 3 Aegis-equipped Arleigh Burke-class destroyers to steam into the southern Caribbean near Venezuela. Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson. The move was described by U.S. officials as part of a push to pressure transnational criminal groups Washington has labeled threats to U.S. security and to disrupt sea routes used to move fentanyl and other drugs. USS Gravely is a Flight II Arleigh Burke destroyer built for multi-mission work. Gravely uses the Aegis Combat System, a linked set of radars and computers that track air and surface contacts and guide defensive missiles. The ship has a Mark 41 vertical launch system able to fire standard surface-to-air missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and ASROC anti-submarine rockets. It can operate 2 MH-60 helicopters from its hangar and flight deck, extending the ship's search and response reach well beyond the hull. Gravely's propulsion package, gas turbines driving 2 shafts, gives it the speed and endurance to sustain long patrols. The ship carries a crew trained in air defense, anti-submarine warfare, and boarding operations, so it can shift quickly from surveillance to action when intelligence or rules of engagement allow. Gravely's name honors Vice Admiral Samuel L. Gravely Jr., a historic figure in the U.S. Navy. The ship carries that legacy in its patches and in the way sailors talk about duty and first. That symbolic weight matters on long deployments. Names and history are part of what keeps a crew focused when watches are long and the sea is empty. Operationally, Gravely will likely be used as a high-end sensor and missile node, monitoring aircraft and surface traffic, protecting other ships in the group, and providing missile response if a high-value threat is identified. USS Jason Dunham brings similar weapons and a few public notes about recent operations. Like other Flight 2IA Arleigh Burkes, Jason Dunham has the Aegis system, VLS cells that can fire Tomahawk, Standard, and ASROC rockets, and a hangar for MH-60 helicopters. The ship is roughly 509 feet long and built to sustain long deployments, participate in carrier strike groups, and conduct independent patrols. Public Navy releases show Jason Dunham has returned from extended deployments and worked with carrier groups and allied navies, which speaks to its training and interoperability with other U.S. and partner assets. In an anti-smuggling role, Jason Dunham's helicopters and embarked visit board search-seizure teams give it the tools to find, approach, and inspect suspicious small craft at sea. USS Sampson is a proven multi-mission destroyer with a history of deployments across the Pacific and allied exercises. Sampson's features include the Mark 41 VLS, a 5-inch gun for surface engagements, torpedo tubes for anti-submarine warfare, and advanced radar and sonar suites for detecting submarines and low-flying threats. Sampson has participated in humanitarian responses, multinational exercises, and long deployments, showing the class's flexibility. For the current patrols off Venezuela, Sampson can perform the same layered tasks as the other two ships: long-range detection, helicopter sorties for scouting and interdiction, close-in naval gunfire if directed, and anti-submarine searches where intelligence suggests subs or narco-subs might be present. Taken together, these three destroyers create overlapping capabilities. Aegis radars on one ship share tracks with the others. Helicopters from any of the ships fly to investigate contacts, and boarding teams move from ship to small boats for inspections. The combination of long-range missiles, anti-submarine weapons, and aviation gives commanders options. Deter suspicious movement with presence, intercept and board small craft, or use missiles if ordered under strict rules of engagement. On board each destroyer, watches and drills replace headlines. Sailors monitor radar and sonar screens, check engine rooms, and run aviation operations. Helicopter crews plan flight lines to sweep shipping lanes for low, fast boats or suspicious loads. Boarding teams rehearse night approaches and searches so they can move quickly and safely when ordered to stop and inspect a vessel. The ship's legal and intelligence officers review evidence and liaise with regional partners so any interdiction fits international law and the mission's rules. Those routines are low drama but high stakes. The ships must avoid incidents that would widen a political clash while still pursuing smugglers who change tactics fast. The Venezuelan government framed the deployment as a violation of sovereignty and mere threats. They must have forgotten a recent encounter when 12 FA-18 Super Hornets slid off the carrier deck into a Black Sea sky. They left in silence, a tight arrow of metal and fuel, each jet carrying the weight of a single clear order: take away the enemy's safe place. The target lay deep in the Golis Mountains, a cave network cut into stone and sealed with concrete. Inside, planners believed, a militant cell had set up a hardened base and stored weapons for future attacks. The choice of the Super Hornet was careful, not flashy. The F-35 brings stealth and sensors. Tomahawks fly far without a pilot, but the mission needed jets that could carry big, heavy weapons, stay in the air long enough to find their marks, and adjust in flight if things change. Each Super Hornet could bear up to 17,750 pounds of external stores. That room for weight meant the pilots could load bunker busters and guidance gear and still have fuel and sensors to spare. The airplanes were the muscle and the brain at once. On the carrier, the deck crew moved like a single machine. The flight deck was a blur of lights and shouted calls, but that noise stopped the moment the jets pushed into the night. Pilots ran final checks, tuned radios to a silent frequency, and locked weapon systems to the mission profile. They would keep strict radio silence now. Surprise was the real armor. The BLU-109 was the centerpiece. This is not a bomb that makes a big surface blast and a lot of smoke. It is a tool built to burrow. A hardened steel case drives it through concrete and packed earth. Inside is a 535-pound explosive heart, and a programmable fuse sets how long the bomb waits before it goes off. The math matters. Penetrate, pause, detonate, collapse from within. The designers meant it to break through up to 8 feet of reinforced concrete or a couple of 100 feet of dense ground, enough to reach the bones of a bunker and make them fail. The plan split the squadron into 4 groups. Each pair of jets took an entrance to the cave system. Ground spotters had painted tiny points of light with lasers, invisible to all but the bombs and the pilots who trusted them. Flying low to stay under the radar, the Hornets kept tight formation until the last moment. Then, at about 4,200 feet, the first 2 rolled in together and dove. From inside the cockpit, it was all speed and focus. The ground rose fast. The HUD glowed green numbers and markers. Pilots watched their flight path, the bomb's seeker locks, and the laser paint that told the warhead where to aim. Release points arrived on a wire of data and training. The bombs left the wings and began the silent arc into the mountain. There were no fireworks to announce the strike. From the air, you might have thought the missiles disappeared into stone. Then, not minutes later, but seconds, the mountain answered. Deep detonations sent internal pressure waves through dark tunnels. Stored munitions inside the caves ignited and added their fury to the first blast. The effect was not a surface crater, but an internal shudder and collapse. Supports snapped, corridors fell in, the safe rooms filled with rubble. This was the point. Conventional bombs conceal an entrance. They can leave a mouth that looks closed, but caves can hide and survive. The BLU-109 struck where the enemy thought they were safest, inside. When the chambers went, the mountain itself became a gravestone for the base. Back on the carrier, mission planners watched feeds and read sensors. Heat signatures, seismic blips, and secondary explosions streamed across screens. The first wave climbed away and formed up. Some crews swung back to check for remaining targets. Others circled to watch for movement. The plan always left room for a second phase. Follow-up strikes to finish what the first pass had started, or to hit emergent threats that showed themselves once the dust settled. What the strike did best was deny sanctuary. The cave network had been a place to hide, store, and plan. After the blast, the pathways that let militants move and resupply were gone or too dangerous to use. The mission did not seek only bodies, it aimed to remove the place itself as an option. The war in the dark is a war of rooms and routes. Take the rooms away, and the routes collapse. Precision mattered at every step. The BLU-109 needed a precise hit to reach the pocket of space it would destroy. Lasers from ground teams, special operators who risked being close enough to paint targets, had to be steady and true. Pilots had to time their dives perfectly. The bomb's programmable fuses had to count their fractions of seconds and detonate at the depth that would cause the most structural failure. One mistimed moment, one misread guide beam, could mean the difference between collapse and a wasted strike. When the first wave climbed to safer air, they watched the results. Secondary fires flared and then died. Smoke climbed in thin columns. The mountain's face bore new cracks and scars, but that was not the real measure. The caves, the chambers, the storage pits, they were no longer serviceable. Men who had planned on hiding there would find no practical shelter. Tools and weapons could be buried or destroyed. Plans could be erased. The strike showed another lesson. A small number of aircraft, with the right weapons and accurate intelligence, can do the work that once needed entire campaigns. Years ago, hitting a mountain hideout might have required days of bombing, long runs of ordnance, or a ground assault that risked many lives. Here, a dozen jets in one synchronized hour reached deep, struck hard, and left the terrain unusable. That precision reduces collateral damage and concentrates force where it counts. The operation did not end with the explosions. After the smoke thinned, teams moved in to assess. Sensors told them the major chambers had collapsed. If any militants had survived, escape routes would be narrow and tracked. If any weapons or intelligence caches remained partially intact, follow-up teams would find what the strikes had exposed. The strike's success was both physical and informational. The blast removed shelter, and it revealed what the enemy had hidden. Still, the battlefield kept speaking. Secondary explosions had thrown debris and caused local shifts in the mountain. The aftershocks mattered. The planning staff knew that war has quiet echoes. Caves that seemed dead might hide small pockets where survivors cling to life. Slow, methodical searches would follow, but the initial goal, deny the enemy a safe base, had been achieved. This sort of strike is not about spectacle. They broke the action into a single pulse. Find, fix, strike, and finish. All inside 5 minutes. It began with a flicker on a screen and ended with a chain of command that no longer worked. The AN/ASQ-228, Advanced Targeting FLIR under one Super Hornet, did the seeing. It turned dark rock and shadow into bright shapes and moving heat. It picked out 12 fighters trying to slip through a narrow crevice where no human eye could reach. In a moment, those men were no longer hidden. They were targets. The sensor did more than show heat. Its software separated weapon profiles from bodies, traced motion through brush, and fed exact coordinates into the jet systems. The laser designator on the pod painted tiny invisible dots on each figure. Weapons officers in the backseater and crews on other jets watched those dots appear on their screens. The network stitched those feeds together. One jet could track, another could confirm, and a third could release a bomb, all without a single person on the ground calling the shot. When the command came, the pilots did not chatter. They flew in tight rhythm, eyes on the instruments. The Super Hornet carried both the sensor and the weapons needed to make the strike count. They did not drop dumb bombs. They mapped each target with laser precision and timed each delivery so the blast hit at a depth calculated to collapse the caves from the inside. The BLU-109s were the right tool for that job. Heavy, hard-cased, built to dig through concrete and packed earth and then detonate where it hurt most. What made the kill chain fast was the way the systems linked together. Data moved as if there were no distance between aircraft. Target tracks updated in real time. The weapons crews saw the same picture that the sensor saw. Identification, targeting, and firing happened as a single flow. That flow closed the gap between detection and destruction. By the time the enemy realized they were exposed, there was no time to run. The strike hit near simultaneously across the crevice. The bombs went in, and the mountain spoke from inside. There were no showy crashes on the face of the cliff. The effect was internal. Tunnels bowed and supports failed. Pressure waves rolled through chambers and ignited ammo the fighters had stockpiled. Pieces of the network collapsed into powder and wreckage. Men who had planned an escape found their exits blocked by fallen stone. The result was immediate and strategic. The enemy's chain of command fractured as leaders and messengers were cut off, buried, or scattered. Orders stopped flowing. Units that had depended on a central base found themselves isolated and blind. The operation did more than destroy fighters. It broke the system they used to coordinate attacks. In war, ruining a single node can create ripple effects that spread faster than any reinforcements. This outcome was not an accident. It came from rehearsal, training, and a shared doctrine. Sensors and shooters must think as one. Pilots trained for common movements. Weapons officers learned to read the images the same way. Mission planners rehearsed the handoffs until the most complex actions felt like muscle memory. With that discipline, the whole machine could move as one thought, shaving minutes off a process that used to take hours or days. Technology made that thought possible, but people made it real. Pilots watched the images and verified what the system suggested. Weapons officers ran the math and set fuses to the exact millisecond. The carrier strike group's command staff stayed 2 steps ahead, ready to shift targets, order a second pass, or abort if civilians appeared. Each role mattered. A single mistake could waste a strike, or worse, carry consequences for innocent people. That margin for error forced calm and precision at every level. The system also changed how commanders judge risk. With a standoff sensor like the AN/ASQ-228, Jets could stay well beyond the reach of most shoulder-fired threats. That distance let them run longer, watch harder, and fire from positions that kept pilots out of immediate danger. Yet safety did not mean sloppiness. The reliance on sensors required perfect discipline on the ground teams who lasered targets, and ruthless care from pilots who had to trust the data. What happened next showed the flexibility that made the strike decisive. Heat signatures revealed movement in a side tunnel. Rather than head back to the carrier and wait for a new plan, some Super Hornets called for fuel. Mid-air refueling kept them on station. They topped off from tankers, synced with the rest of the group, and executed a second targeted strike minutes after the first. The ability to refuel and re-engage without returning to base turned a single raid into a sustained pressure campaign in real time. That loop, detect, strike, refuel, strike again, kept the enemy from reforming. Where once a force might withdraw, regroup, and reappear a day later, these fighters could unspool the enemy's options in hours. The faster tempo let Allied commanders protect future forces by removing imminent threats before they could move or call for backup. Beyond the bombs and the sensors, the strike was a study in timing. Laser designators needed steady hands. Fuses needed correct programming. The AN/ASQ-228's resolution was critical. It did not simply say, "There's someone there." It showed posture, weight, and movement. That detail converted probable threats into confirmed targets. It lowered the fog of war, making decisions clearer and the use of force more surgical. There was also a moral element. The system's precision reduced the need to send in ground teams into ambushes. It cut the number of people who would have to walk into a trap to confirm the enemy's presence. Saving those lives was part of the calculus. In this strike, the technology protected both attacking crews and special forces, who might otherwise have to do the dangerous close work. After the bursts of fire, teams sifted through the data, sensors replayed the event frame by frame, analysts parsed signatures to determine what had been destroyed and what might still be salvageable. Seismic sensors and infrared scans told planners where chambers had collapsed and where heat still pulsed. This after-action feed fed prosecution, intelligence, and future planning. The strike was not an end. It was a source of fresh, usable information. The effect on the enemy was simple: no safe place. They could not rely on caves, bunkers, or buried depots if a sensor from the sky could find a narrow crevice and seed it for collapse. The loss of sanctuary forced them into movement or dispersion, both of which made them easier to track through communications and funds. The psychological shock of seeing a base erased in minutes also spread doubt among survivors, undermining morale and loyalty. The message behind the raid is simple and loud. A carrier and its fighters can reach anywhere, at any time, without asking for permission or waiting for a local base. That mobility changes the map. Where mountains and deserts once felt safe, they now face a sky that sees and a sea that moves. A carrier strike group is no longer only a show of force. It is a strike force, mobile, fast, and able to act alone if needed. In the mountains, removing a leader in his inner circle does more than kill or capture people. It breaks networks. Orders stop moving. Plans collapse. When a command node vanishes, the rest of the group splinters into confusion and fear. That ripple effect protects troops who might move in later. It also buys time for diplomats and law enforcement to act. The mission becomes more than a single hit. It becomes a way to reshape how an enemy fights. The tools that make that possible are not magical. They are aircraft, sensors, weapons, and sailors and pilots who know how to use them together. The AN/ASQ-228F LIR pod turns night into a clear picture. It sees heat and movement through smoke, dust, and brush. It tells you in plain lines where a person stands, who carries a weapon, and which path someone is using to flee. That picture lets pilots mark targets and commanders decide in seconds. Flight deck crews and pilots call the Super Hornet the Rhino because it grew into the role. Bigger, tougher, and more lethal than its predecessors. It is not just a jet for dogfights, it is a flying toolbox. It can carry heavy bombs like the BLU-109 and still have range and agility. It can patrol for hours and then dive for a target the same night. That blend of power and endurance matters when targets hide under rocks and behind trees. Those twin Pratt & Whitney engines give the Rhino thrust. They push the jet fast enough to cross miles of air and to escape danger. The shape of the jet, swept wings and leading-edge extensions, keeps it nimble when a pilot needs to turn tight or dodge threats. But raw speed and maneuverability are only half the story. The Hornet's real strength is its systems: radar, targeting pods, and onboard computers that stitch all the battlefield data into one picture. A strike like the Mountain Raid is a chain. The sensor sees, the pilot confirms, the weapons officer programs the fuse, the bomb drops, the mountain falls. Each link must work, and each person must trust the other. The AN/ASQ-228 gives the first link the edge. It finds people where no one thought to look. From tens of miles away, it points like a finger. The Hornet closes, keeps quiet, and delivers the punch that ends the group's ability to use that place again. Carriers make that process repeatable. A carrier at sea carries not just jets, but tankers, sensors, and crews for days, weeks, or months. If a strike reveals new targets, jets refuel and go again. If the job needs more firepower, the carrier can launch more sorties. That ability to refuel and re-engage keeps pressure on any force that thought running into the hills would save them. This kind of power changes how wars start and how they end. In the past, hitting a fortress might have required a long planning cycle, local permission, and a ground force to clear the wreckage. Now, a carrier can act on its own intelligence and strike within hours. That speed closes the door on escape. It also reduces the need for massed forces on the ground, lowering the risk for soldiers who would have to clear a hardened site by hand. But speed and reach do not mean rough tactics. Precision is the aim. The BLU-109 is a tool designed to break what hides under the earth and concrete. It does not leave a wide blast zone. It goes in deep and detonates, where it will collapse internal chambers. That limits surface damage and focuses destruction where it matters. Combined with the targeting pod's ability to single out people in movement, the result is a strike that ends a base without flattening an entire mountain or village. There is also a legal and political edge to naval air power. Acting from the sea avoids the need for host nation bases. That can matter in places where local politics are fragile or where asking permission would slow action to the point of uselessness. A carrier off the coast holds options: to act, to wait, or to withdraw, all while staying technically independent. For commanders, that freedom is valuable. It lets them respond to threats fast without becoming entangled in local disputes. Technology also speeds the decision loop. Real-time data flows up from the pod to the jet to the carrier and to command centers ashore. That flow means a new picture can create a new plan in minutes. A fleeing group spotted in a crevice can be marked, struck, and finished before it finds another hiding place. The tempo of war increases. The enemy's window to adapt shrinks. Finally, there is the human side. Sailors on a carrier, pilots in cockpits, and ground crews on the deck all accept risk to keep the system running. They also know their actions have consequences beyond the immediate blast. Taking out a mountain base can save future lives, of soldiers, of civilians, of aid workers. But it can also harden attitudes and push fighters to new tactics. That is why follow-through matters. Arrests, prosecutions, and efforts to cut off finances and safe havens after a strike keep the pressure firm and fair. A pirate crew thought they'd hit the jackpot. A massive ship drifting silently through the Gulf of Aden. No lights, no flag, no escorts, just a tempting shadow in the dark. To the cartel-backed pirates, it looked like an easy target, and so they took off after it. What they didn't know was that this wasn't some helpless freighter. It was the last ship they ever wanted to mess with. Behind that massive silhouette was a fully loaded, nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier. And by the time they realized it, they weren't making a getaway, and they were praying for one. What happened next in those dark waters? And how did a normal intercept turn into a nightmare on the high seas? Join us as we find out what happened to the cartel pirates who tried to hit the wrong U.S. Navy ship. They came armed, thinking a cargo ship had fallen into their hands, a big, slow ship ripe for the taking. Armed Somali pirates filled the two skiffs. They cut through the waves at full speed with their engines roaring across the dark waters of the Gulf of Aden. What was their target? A massive silhouette on the horizon. The said silhouette had no flag, No lights. It was just like a gigantic steel container floating quietly. In pirate logic, that usually means unescorted freight, but they couldn't have been more mistaken. It didn't take up to 90 seconds before the silhouette revealed itself before their eyes. They finally saw it for what it really was, and it was not a cargo ship at all. What was before them was a floating war fortress. Not just a US Navy ship, but a full-blown nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. The kind that launches warplanes before breakfast and carries more firepower than some countries combined. The battle line was drawn. The pirates weren't ill-armed at all. They had AKs and RPGs, but the carrier was a different story altogether. There were about 5,000 sailors, Sea Whiz cannons, radar-guided missile systems, and a zero-patience policy for threats. What happened next wasn't even a standoff. There was no fight. The Navy taught the pirates a hard lesson, one that started with a warning and ended with weapons drawn and the pirates face down on a rigid hull inflatable boat, or RHIB. And this is what happens when pirates pick the wrong ship. And not just any ship, but trying to hit a US Navy aircraft carrier was the mistake of the century. The radar picked them first. Two fast-moving blips with low signature and no AIS signal were approaching at top speed. In the Red Sea, that's never a good sign. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the system lit up in no time. Without hesitation, the operator called out the approaching threat as they were closing in. The officer on the deck didn't need to be told twice. He leaned into comms in the flight deck to launch a Seahawk immediately. Outside the information center, the carrier was already awake. This wasn't a sleepy convoy after all. It was a full strike group on patrol, and the carrier was its nerve center, not something to be messed with. In less than 2 minutes, an MH-60R Seahawk could be seen spinning its rotors as it roared off the deck. Loaded with a door gunner, radar systems, and eyes sharp enough to ID a tattoo at 5,000 feet, it moved with precision straight toward the incoming threat. Meanwhile, the sailors on the flight deck had paused for exactly 0 seconds. That means they've been up and about. The men in yellow shirts cleared space. Those in red shirts checked weapons load to avoid mistakes, and green shirts waved clearance for another bird on standby. In the CIC, it became clear that the skiffs were splitting. One was pulling apart while the other was still heading straight for the carrier. It was a typical pirate tactic: divide and confuse. But what did the Navy do? There was no panic at all. The captain gave a simple command. He ordered the crew to maintain course and let the pirates do what they wanted. The Seahawk, which was many feet up in the air at this point, had visual of the assault skiffs. The pilot wasted no time in calling in. He notified the crew of the hostile posture and the visible armament. And that was all the Navy needed. Because while most pirate encounters get the benefit of the doubt, this one has not only crossed the line, it has gone deep into the enemy's territory. To make matters worse for the pirates, a second Seahawk was launched. RHIB teams on the nearby destroyer USS Gravely geared up. On deck, Sea Whiz spun quietly into standby. The whole ship was calm, focused, and fast. But if the pirates thought they were waiting to be attacked, then they were grossly mistaken, and they were not waiting to be attacked because on a US aircraft carrier, hesitation is not protocol. Instead, it's a liability. As for the pirates, they had no idea that they were sailing into boiling water. From their own point of view, it was still just a big ship on the water. From the Navy's view, however, it was two threats closing in fast and everything was in motion. The pirates had no idea yet, but the warning shot was already locked and loaded, waiting to be fired. The skiff on the right didn't stop or change its course. It didn't even slow down. It just kept coming in with blind confidence, which was already bordering on stupidity. Having had enough, the Seahawk dropped altitude at 800 yards. Its side gunner swung the M240 into position, but there was no firing yet. The shooter simply took his posture. The posture itself was a not-so-subtle way of telling the pirates that they weren't welcome there. But did the pirates flinch? Number one of them even stood up, and with confidence, he held up something long and metallic over his shoulder. That's right, it was an RPG. And that was the trigger they needed. Hostility had been confirmed. Back on the Eisenhower, the captain didn't so little as to even blink. From the port side of the destroyer, two 11-meter RHIBs landed on the water. The vessels were packed full with Navy visit, armed to the teeth with whatever armor one can think of. These weren't diplomats, in fact, peace is not in their dictionary. These were literal floating SWAT teams with a license to not only act fast, but to also hit very hard. Maybe the pirates didn't know this, but the carrier itself didn't need to fire a single round. That's what the task force was for. But if things escalated, Sea Whiz turrets were already humming quietly, the radar was tracking the skiff like a hawk staring at a mouse in an open field. If the carrier fires a shot, the battle may be over before it begins. While all this was going on, the pirates moved into flanking position. It was like a losing chess game. Losing indeed, because one skiff was trying to fake out 2 warships and a helicopter. That's not exactly a winning strategy, if it was a strategy at all. Overhead, the Seahawk's gunner gave a final visual warning. He fired a burst across the water, just in front of the skiff's bow. That was a crystal clear message. It was at this time that the pirates reacted, but it was a bit too late. The RHIB was already on them. They had their engines roaring, cutting across the surf like a scalpel blade. They showed what a real strategy looked like when the first VBSS team boxed in the skiff from starboard and the second team blocked retreat from the rear. They yelled over the loudspeaker, asking them to lay down their weapons and to hands up. Confusion arose. The panic was so great that one pirate tossed his AK into the water. Another froze, and that was a smart choice. But the others had their own plans. The Navy did not waste time, though. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Weapons were confiscated. The pirates were zip-tied and laid on the deck of the RHIB, with their skiff being towed behind. Security had returned to the sea. But what was Eisenhower doing this whole time? The large carrier never stopped moving. Not even for a second did it slow down a little bit. Because aircraft carriers don't need to handle every threat themselves. They bring an entourage that fights back harder. It was at this point the pirates realized they'd messed up. Not only did they pick the wrong ship, they had the misfortune of picking the wrong ocean as well. They were zip-tied, disarmed, and found themselves staring at deck boots. But the Navy was far from. The thing is, when a move is made on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, even a small one, they don't just neutralize the threat. They investigate, document, and send a message. Because it's their belief that tomorrow's threat might have night vision, not just AKs. So while the VBSS teams hauled the suspects aboard the carrier, the second Seahawk flew a perimeter loop. The first Seahawk had done its job, now it was its turn. It was scanning thermal signatures, hull markings, even checking if that skiff had any sort of tech inside. GPS, sat phones, encrypted radio, any hint that this was more than just a bunch of amateurs. And it turned out it wasn't just some slapdash pirate crew. Back on the Eisenhower, the mood was still business. The carrier hadn't even broken formation. It hadn't missed a single step. The catapults were still launching FA-18 Super Hornets into the sky. The deck crew hadn't even batted an eyelid. If anyone was there, aside those involved, they wouldn't even know an intercept had happened unless they looked at the radar logs. And that's the thing about carriers. They don't flinch. They have no reason to. Because while pirates are out here chasing money with leaky motors and RPGs, the U.S. Navy is running a staggering 100,000-ton nuclear-powered fortresses capable of launching jets every 30 seconds and directing regional security across half the globe. But there's a twist here. Remember the second skiff? The one that veered off early? It turns out that one didn't get away either. A drone quickly spotted about 6 nautical miles out, idling near a fishing vessel that looked a little too clean to be hauling tuna. It took only a few minutes for that vessel to be swarmed by a different RHIB team from the USS Mason, another destroyer in the strike group. The result was that 2 more pirates were detained, 1 laptop was seized, and a whole bunch of questions that'll be answered in a classified tent somewhere in Djibouti. What started as a simple intercept had just peeled back a much bigger layer. But the funny part is that the original pirate crew still thought they'd attacked a normal cargo ship. That was right up until a U.S. Marine leaned over and brought them to reality. For anyone still wondering why a carrier is the worst target imaginable, here's what makes it untouchable. Here's how it is. Attacking a U.S. aircraft carrier is like bringing a butter knife to a tank fight. Except in this case, it's not just a tank. It's a floating tank capable of launching fighter jets and has its own zip code. These pirates thought they were chasing an ordinary cargo ship. But when they came face to face with it, What they actually found was the most heavily protected vessel on any ocean. First off, it should be noted that an aircraft carrier is never alone. If a pirate is just pulling up on a flat deck, he's actually pulling up on a carrier strike group, a tight formation of destroyers, cruisers, submarines, supply ships, helicopters, drones, and a sky full of fighter jets. It's basically a floating war city with a zero-patience policy. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, for instance, is nuclear-powered, over 1,000 feet long, houses nearly 5,000 personnel, capable of launching fully armed FA-18s every 25 seconds. But that's all there is to the Sea Beast. Below deck, there are multiple hangar bays, maintenance shops, weapon storage, radar control rooms, intelligence centers, and that's not forgetting that it has its own internal police force. Yes, a police force on the sea. There's no inch of the ship that's not being watched, logged, and defended. Then there are weapons. The carrier has close-in weapon systems, also known as the Sea Whiz, which fires 4,500 rounds per minute. It's like a laser-guided meat grinder that doesn't ask permission. Then there's the one known as ESSM, Evolved Sea Sparrow Missiles. Anti-air, anti-missile, anti-whatever. Fast, accurate, and brutal. And one cannot leave out the MH-60R Hawk helicopters, EA-18G Growlers for jamming, or E-2D Hawkeye radar birds that can see farther than most nations even can. With this arsenal, how can one even sneak up on a carrier? If a pirate crew threatens to surprise a carrier, they get flagged, tracked, locked, and lit up before they can even pick up speed. But here's the shocking part. In this encounter, the Navy didn't even use a tenth of what they had. They could have launched drones, fired warning flares, scrambled jets, deployed Marine detachments, or, if it got bad enough, authorized lethal force within seconds. But they didn't need to, because the threat was so far beneath their response capabilities, it was almost laughable. To put it into perspective, a single carrier strike group can control airspace the size of Texas. Yes, the massive city of Texas. That means from hundreds of miles out, they know so much about attackers. They know who they are, where they're going, and what is being carried. If they let anyone get close, it's because they want to see what such a person will do next. And if what is done next looks even slightly hostile, the game ends before it even begins. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower has been instrumental in fencing off attacks over the years. Recently, on 30th of December 2023, Danish container ship Maersk Hangzhou issued a distress call after coming under fire from 4 small ships commanded by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels from Yemen. Attempts were also made to board Maersk Hangzhou by force, while a contracted security team defended the ship. Dwight D. Eisenhower and guided missile destroyer gravely responded to a distress call from the container ship. Verbal commands were radioed to the Houthi ships, while helicopters from Dwight D. Eisenhower were dispatched. After taking small arms fire, U.S. Navy helicopters returned fire, sinking 3 of the 4 Houthi ships. There was no damage to U.S. equipment or personnel. In the process of responding to the distress call, gravely shot down 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles fired from Yemen. On 10 January 2024, the Houthis carried out more missile attacks against U.S. and U.K. ships. All projectiles were shot down by Dwight D. Eisenhower and other ships. On 12, aircraft from Carrier Air Wing 3, embarked on Dwight D. Eisenhower, participated in the 2024 missile strikes in Yemen against Houthi rebels. Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired by the cruiser Philippine Sea, as well as the destroyers Mason and Gravely, and the submarine Florida. So trying to pirate a U.S. carrier is not just reckless, it's literally asking to be tackled by an entire team when you're holding a water gun. And the Navy wasn't even done yet, because neutralizing the threat is only one step. The next step was exploiting every mistake the enemy made. So while the pirates remained in a steel room below deck, zip-tied and silently asking themselves why they did what they did, the Navy's intel teams were already dissecting the entire gear the pirates used. That RPG launcher was taken in and scanned for origin. The laptop. Everything was scanned, and the Navy was able to dig up quite a lot of information, because the Navy doesn't just deal with pirates, they study them. Hard. In the command spaces of the USS Eisenhower, the analysts were combing through everything they could comb through, Thermal footage, radio intercepts, power signatures, hull materials. Even the fuel cans got sampled for information. Of all these scratches and scabs, one strange frequency caught their attention. It somehow matched chatter previously intercepted near an illegal arms shipment from Eritrea. And just like that, a seemingly random pirate raid turned out to be part of a network, which meant the follow-up wouldn't be just an after-action report. It would be a real-time targeting package. 12 hours didn't pass before that data was already flying up the chain. CENTCOM, AFRICOM, coalition partners, intelligence fusion centers in Bahrain and Djibouti. The whole machine moved fast, because the next raid might not be with RPGs. Maybe they might come with drones next time, or smuggled man-pads. Or worse, the pirates may be unknowingly acting as bait for a deeper, hidden threat. And that's how the US Navy operates. Every small contact is treated like something to test, a potential distraction, or a prelude to something bigger. So instead of swatting flies, the Navy builds a map of the entire swarm. The pirates were just the beginning. After they were caught, the real work started. Navy teams began digging into the details. Drones flew new paths. Planners quietly said the 3 words that mean a big trouble. Target package confirmed. The sea looked calm again, but things had changed. The Navy was watching, and now so was everyone else. By morning, life on the USS Eisenhower was back to normal. Jets took off, people had coffee, and everything ran smoothly. But behind the scenes, a lot was going on. That messy pirate attack had set off a big reaction. Satellites moved. Strange messages were flagged. Even friendly ships nearby were warned. Because this wasn't just a warning to the pirates, it was a message to anyone else thinking about doing the same. A US carrier isn't easy to mess with. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.